Star Trek, the ultimate franchise. These are the voyages of 3 veteran Trekkies, Rich, Ian, and Toby. Their ongoing mission? To explore the vast Star Trek universe, to seek out new perspectives and fresh debates, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Beyond the Final Frontier.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with me, your host, Rich Matthews, and my fellow voyagers across Alpha Quadrant, Mr. Ian Spelling.
Hi, everybody.
And Mr. Toby Weidman.
Hello.
So today we have a special guest joining us to discuss what we think is a key part of Star Trek, which, along with the big science fiction ideas and the fun and the friendships and the characters and all of that, is social commentary, whether that's through allegory or directly addressing a subject matter in Star Trek. It's seeded by Gene Roddenberry from the very beginning. And so who better to join us in this conversation than a man who is currently steeped in academia, in film and film theory, Dr. Chris Nunn. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
So Chris is, full disclosure, currently my supervisor as I do my PhD at the University of Birmingham. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Film and Creative Writing. So Chris, as sort of set your table for everyone listening, what's your first experience of Star Trek?
I probably watched Star Trek as it was running on BBC Two in the early 90s, probably about 5 years old, I think, watching certainly the original series. And then I came to The Next Generation at the conclusion of The Best of Both Worlds, and then watched, I think, quite continuously everything as it was aired in the UK. So I was there for the start of Deep Space Nine. A very vivid memory of watching Way of the Warrior, actually, as that came out, and that felt like a big sort of gear shift for the show. All of Voyager, in its run, all the way to the finale. Bizarrely, not Enterprise. I didn't watch that as it was broadcast here.
Neither did anybody here.
I was about to say, I think that was a general problem.
No one seemed to be watching.
Some of us had to. It was part of our job. We had to watch it.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I came to it much later when you can kind of sing along to the theme tune and sort of laugh
It's
a
been
bit.
a long road.
Yeah, exactly. And it was definitely was a friend of mine who was like, you can't be a Star Trek fan and not watch Enterprise, and you'll learn to love the theme tune. And I think me and Megan, who watched it together for the first time, did learn to love the theme tune in its own way. And then I certainly think the show was doing wonderful things by the time it got cancelled.
Classic case of too little, too late.
Yeah.
So, but just before we get into our top 5 social commentary episodes, just another quick question is although you're very much quite high profile in film theory academics now in the UK and globally, that goes without saying, but you haven't really touched on Star Trek directly, have you?
No, apart from guesting on podcasts, actually, is the only time. So I did 3 with Duncan Barrett on, I can't remember the name of his podcast now, but it's about Star Trek and history, whenever he wanted to sort of unpack, I guess, the way that the film, so we did 2001 kind of side by side with the motion picture. We did First Contact and looked at lots of Frakes' influences as a director. So I guess I got pulled in there in a film context. I was writing a book proposal at the same time as someone who eventually did Unmade Star Trek. So definitely came very close to it, to writing a book on Unmade Star Trek, which someone else has now done. So turns out I didn't need to do it, which, I guess is fine. And other than that, no, I don't think I have.
Well, all I know is that any doubts I had about whether one of my supervisors would be Trekkie enough was very quickly dispelled. Either by this picture of Sisko on the door or the picture of Janeway by your desk and the many Star Trek books. So it's a clear passion.
Before we get into the nuts and bolts of our social issues, I'm really intrigued, and I think, Toby, you're going to agree with me on this. We all want to know what kind of student our friend Richard is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does he have a shot at passing? Should he even bother to go to Star Trek Las Vegas?
How's the PhD going?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think he... I think he should. I think from his years of professional writing, obviously with the two of you at various points, the writing is of an excellent quality. The research is very in-depth, often maybe even citing too much to sort of structure an argument.
Ooh, subtle hint, Matthews.
Yeah, and so
that really surprises us.
His hair grows a half inch every time he talks too much. Look at it now.
He does waffle on, Chris. He does waffle on.
Someone's hair has to grow, boys.
Right, now we're getting into the weeds.
So I'm really excited. I think the research is really important to Star Trek fans and fandom in sort of unpacking what this franchise means and perhaps can continue to mean or has historically meant to the people who are engaged with it the most. And so I'm very excited to see it continue to progress.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those properties that nobody ever discusses. So I'm glad he's doing this.
It's just glad that someone's finally talking about it.
Right? Come on.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Rich Matthews roast. Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions for you, Chris. You said that you started watching the original series, right? What was it about it that drew you in? And were there any episodes that indelibly embedded in your memory in terms of like really standing out as episodes that drew you in?
Yeah, for different reasons than the subject of this podcast. But I remember the man trap really vividly as, quite possibly one of my first encounters with the original series. And I think there just is something quite terrifying about having all the salt sucked out of your body. I mean, it was a very, bearing in mind I'm probably 5 years old at this point, and so that's really stuck in my head.
It's still an arresting image.
Yeah, it is.
As an adult, the makeup is really good.
I'm trying to remember the context of it, but I do remember sort of discovering the cage quite young as well. But obviously I don't know how, but again, it's stuck in my head really, the different crew, Pike, and they're having a new sort of life now, I suppose, with Strange New Worlds. But I do remember that and that story quite vividly as well.
Did you see that before the menagerie then? Because we've discussed this before, and I saw the cage way after the menagerie.
So yeah, it's entirely possible that I am muddying the two, but I'd have to look it up. But maybe there was a special broadcast of the pilot in the 90s.
I think there was. I saw the cage before I saw the menagerie.
Here's how old I am. I was at a Star Trek convention when Gene Roddenberry showed the cage in color, which was a big deal.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, in New York City.
I think, did they also not, because I bought all the DVD box sets as they came out, and it's possible that the cage was attached to the first season of Voyager for some reason. I know that's very peculiar, and were we not in the middle of a recording, I would go downstairs and get the box and just check. But I've got a feeling, for some reason, the cage...
Well, when Rich starts to talk too much on a certain subject, you run down and try to get the box.
Okay, that's fine. I'll go in.
If you pots have stopped calling me Black now, which we'll get on with this. So what we'll do is I'll give my first entry as normal, but Chris, then if you could go after me, and that way we'll go through round the houses that way with each entry, if that's okay. But rather than throwing you in the deep end straight away, and I'll try to keep it brief because I'm getting the message. So my number 5 top social commentary episode is In the Hands of the Prophets, the Deep Space Nine Season 1 ender, which essentially has my favourite antagonist in all Star Trek, Vedic Wynn, boo hiss, basically attempting to shut down Keiko O'Brien's school on the station on the grounds that she teaches science and facts and therefore refers to the Bajoran prophets as wormhole aliens, and there are Bajoran children in her class, and it all escalates to the point that someone bombs the school and is tied into Wynn's overall machinations to become Kai and defeat Vedic Bareil and all of that sort of thing. And obviously its primary commentary is on religious fundamentalism versus secular education, which was very prominent then, of course. And I think Robert Hewitt Wolf has been on record saying that it was his expression of Roddenberry's IDIC idea, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. But sadly, while it was mainly about teaching evolution as an allegory in 1993, now you can add climate change, history, fact, truth, all of those things to it in terms of what it means and how it resonates as a social commentary today. And it's just a really, really good, nasty boo hiss episode for Louise Fletcher as Wynn, who, once you pair her up with further down the line with Mark Alamo's horrible, sleazy Ducat, is for me the most potent ongoing baddies.
Was Vedic Wynn the originator of fake news? Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Well, maybe just fundamentalism, Bajoran fundamentalism. No, it's a really good episode. So I think it's also one of Colin Meaney's favourite episodes, which is interesting given he's Irish and the background he would have grown up in Ireland at the time. So, Chris, what's your number 5?
Good. That's a great start. My number 5 is Voyager's Critical Care.
Oh, cool.
Which I don't think gets talked about enough in this context, mainly because maybe we were all a bit tired of Voyager in season 7. I don't know if that's fair. But actually, must give credit to my wife Megan actually on this one, because we were talking about this topic and she remembered, that one where the Doctor is essentially having to, a computer is deciding whose life is worth saving and whose isn't. And, it seemed like a really quite scathing allegory on certainly perhaps privatized healthcare, and certainly then the idea of whose life is worth saving, which I think is embedded in a lot of Star Trek and in a lot of different places, to be fair. I don't think it's solely here, but it is quite heart-wrenching to watch effectively the Doctor go a bit nuts because he's trying to save lives. And again, strong central performance from Picardo and Gregory Itzin in support, and I can't remember the guy who plays the administrator, but he's great as well. I think one of its issues is that it resolves relatively quickly. I mean, the Doctor does have that conversation with 7 and 9 at the end and says, was I malfunctioning because I was willing to kill this guy in order to save all these other people? So I guess it does resolve that way, but I think they just leave the hospital very quickly. And you're kind of like, well, what about the young Doctor? What about Gregory Itzin? What about this administrator? What about this? And almost it's one of those, and Star Trek has so many, almost one of those that could be a two-parter for, I really want to know more about this society that felt they had to bring in some aliens to manage their place. And that's such a fascinating concept. And again, like so much of Star Trek, you don't have the runtime, so you're warping in and warping out.
That's a really good one. I mean, that is an interesting... because Voyager sometimes feels like it's either, from my point of view, a bit clumsy when it does some commentary, but that was a bit on the nose, but still nonetheless effective. I don't know what you guys think.
There's a similar episode earlier in season 5 called Latent Image, where the EMH is faced with a moral dilemma where two crewmen, he has to choose between them, and is it Ensign Kim? I think he chooses to save Ensign Kim, and then he...
And a red shirt.
Yeah, and then he has a breakdown, and Voyager's solution to it is to just erase his memory, and then he finds clues that he thinks there's a mystery going on. It's slowly revealed that it's actually Janeway who is deleting his memory engrams.
That's a very Janeway choice.
Yeah, cold son of a bitch.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I've said it before.
And you'll say it again.
But I, that episode as well has they essentially allow him then to try and deal with it, and he goes through this morality loop constantly, or ethical loop. But yeah, it's a similar kind of story. Who do you choose to save?
Well, it's also a comment on the dangers of erasing painful experiences.
Yeah,
because you're destined to relive. No matter how good your intention is in terms of revising history or removing things, it's painful it may be, and it might be traumatic even, but unfortunately that learning is integral for progression. Yeah. So Ian, what's your first social commentary episode?
The Outcast comes in at number 5.
That's
for
also
me.
my spot here. I should say I haven't ordered mine in any way. I'm just...
I did actually, but it asks, what is normal? What is acceptable? And what's in between normal and acceptable? That will work for the normal crowd and the acceptable crowd. I think it's a very important landmark episode unto itself. I think it's a great Riker episode. I think Melinda Kalia, who was the guest star in that episode, did a wonderful job as quote unquote the love interest for Riker.
Was she Amy on the A-Team? Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah, thought I was.
And we're touching on, conversion therapy and transgender rights, and for a lot of people,
way ahead of the discourse. Way ahead of the discourse.
Way ahead of all of it. Yes, and for Rick Berman gets beat up a lot for not touching on gay this, not touching on gay that. This episode more than touches on it. And it does it beautifully and not too heavy-handedly. My number 1 has to be the most heavy-handed episode ever produced of any Star Trek show, but it makes its point. This makes its point with strong writing, strong storytelling, strong characterization, strong performances, and it's a standout episode. I was very happy to watch it again, and I will say that obviously Discovery touched a lot on transgender rights and all of that element on the nose in many instances, but importantly, main characters and supporting characters were in that fold, so we got time to let those breathe. In the context of a 48-minute episode or whatever Outcast was, it covered a lot of ground. It did it very well. It left a lot to your imagination, and it lets you form your own opinions without cramming it too far down your throat. It's a standout for me.
I always remember it because the two episodes which sort of stuck in my mind from the Star Trek, and similarly, but not but was also rejoined the Trill episode.
But that was more on the nose. That was like let's do a gay episode.
Yeah, and also had it was overplayed for the sensuality slightly, probably, but similarly though, the thing about this one is it is kind of beautifully understated, isn't it? Yeah. The presentation of it is androgynous without being too harsh, without being and it is very fitting. I like the fact it's sort of an overt commentary on what Kirk used to be like, with Riker sometimes being Kirk-light in terms of maneuvering in many ways around the galaxy. The ultra cis male. Yeah, exactly. So cis that he don't care how you identify. Everyone's fair game. But Frakes does a really nice job in this episode, and it's one of those times where you're sort of it's good that they don't just paint him in sort of black and white terms, which could sometimes happen.
Interestingly, though, with the Trill and thinking about Rejoined and sort of trans stuff, that's where Discovery, I think, struggled a lot with that storytelling, is because they kind of brought a Trill in, who, am I right, the actor was non-binary, but they really didn't really explore the sort of Trillness of it, whereas Dax on Deep Space Nine, the meme that goes around constantly is her hugging Kor and saying, Kerr's on my old friend, and then she goes, no, I'm Jadzia now, and then he goes, Jadzia, my old friend, and it's like that's how you treat trans people. I think Discovery, in the spirit of things that might have been slightly too on the nose, that was where I think they had a storytelling opportunity that they didn't quite follow through with.
Agreed. Sometimes the emo-ness of it undermines the eloquence.
Yeah, perhaps. And it felt a wasted opportunity to make the statement that they already were making, and having a non-binary actor and a trans actor and having this storyline. And I thought I really loved that because it's so Star Trek, right? It's really fantastic. And then it didn't seem to land, unfortunately.
Well, I had the Outcast here as well. Ian sort of slightly stole my thunder in that I was actually going to praise Discovery for once by saying, they are probably the most inclusive of the shows, particularly with LGBTQIA plus representation, both in the characters and the cast. This episode, for me, it's interesting to hear you praise it. For me, The Outcast is sort of a middling episode, but I do have to give it credit for what it was trying to do. I do find that there is some problems with it, but the fact that the trans community mostly, I should put bunny ears up there, are positive about this episode and the representation is definitely something that's worth acknowledging. I think the things that are problematic for me is certainly the ending and the kind of acceptance of the conversion therapy to resolve the story. I think that's a little bit troubling. Ian mentioned Rick Berman there. It's symptomatic of a problem in that era when it comes to the representation of the queer community. In that Berman was the one who basically said that he didn't want to have a gay character, a regular, that he would rather explore this as a theme through allegory or guest characters. And I think that the LGBTQIA plus community do have a problem with that. And it's not until Discovery, which was 2017, until that's sort of corrected. And I think you've got
but that shows you it was a bigger issue than Rick Berman. In defense of Berman, that was a social issue, that was an entertainment issue, that's an entertainment business issue, that's a CBS Paramount issue, that there's a lot tied into that.
For me, it's a business issue more than anything else.
No question. They don't want to piss people off.
But that's still a problem.
But there is an argument that that's whatever show they did that on, that's all that show would become about, in the sense of that's all the media would focus on. Initially, anyway. Look at the trouble they had with Janeway. And the same thing happened initially with Cisco. Those issues become the story rather than the points they're trying to make.
And it's exactly what did happen with Discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And actually, one of the things that I think Discovery did or happened around Discovery that I thought was the most iconic was, I believe, a cover issue of Gay Times or something, where it's all the Discovery cast. You flick through and it's stylized photos, fashion shoot, and I just thought this is absolutely wonderful that we've finally got here with this franchise. Again, at various points, fumbled around the sort of themes, and again, look at the hate that Deep Space Nine did receive for Rejoined.
It's true.
You're
quite right to say it was a much bigger issue than Berman as a single showrunner.
But I think that the sort of the criticism was directed at him because he was the one who ultimately made the decision, or albeit whatever the reasons were around it. I think he was the one who was maybe seen as the gatekeeper of preventing it.
Yeah.
Something I did want to mention was that there is, early on in the episode, there is a discussion of pronouns where Riker is talking to Soren about what he should use, and that was way ahead of the discussions that have been happening more recently. So I do think the episode is praiseworthy, but it does come up with caveats for me.
So my number 4 sort of builds on a lot of those themes, not overtly now about gender, but it is New Trek, and I think it's when talking about social effectiveness of social commentary in New Trek, I think it's probably an obvious choice, but it's Ad Astra per Aspera, the episode where Una is placed number one. She wasn't ever really called that after a bit, was she? Una was put on trial for hiding her Illyrian identity, i.e. a species that uses genetic modification. It all comes out, and she's put on trial, essentially with her career in Starfleet and Federation citizenship on the line to some degree. And you know, there's a fine tradition of courtroom dramas that explore these issues in Star Trek, and my number one is a courtroom drama. But in this case, it was sort of, for the first time, it's one of those occasions where I had two episodes that were very similar, and actually, ultimately, I did feel I went for Ad Astra over The Measure of a Man for similar themes about identity, autonomy, agency, and the reality of a society which claims to be entirely open, still having discriminatory practices and rules and regulations, and what that means. And this is, so the reason I say it's sort of related to what was the discussion is this is a similar discussion, but it's not about gender per se. It's about just identity, who you are, and hiding who you are, and feeling unsafe, and yet being of value to a society. And so you sort of fold in immigration and a lot of other, and racism and a lot of other forms of discrimination. I mean, this was very early in season 2 of Strange New Worlds, but it was a case of point that this was proper Star Trek. It doesn't have a lot of those clunky issues that we've talked about with Discovery. It doesn't feel on the nose because it comes from a slightly recurring storyline, and it plays in, and it ultimately is very much the center of one of the main characters. It resonates, and it feels more real than a lot of what Discovery did. I mean, exactly what we've said already is casting in some ways could have done a lot of the work that they then still did on Discovery with a character, whereas this is very much taking a character who, I suppose, presents or passes and has done a lot of work trying to hide who they are, and then what happens when it comes out into the open? It's an
interesting choice, Rich. It's not on my list at all. It's nowhere near my list. I found it incredibly heavy-handed, and I didn't buy into it all that much. It's interesting. That's why Baskin-Robbins has 31 flavors.
You love the Baskin-Robbins, don't you? You love those. That ice
it's
cream.
not on my list either, but I remember when I first watched it, because I've only started watching Strange New Worlds recently, Chris. So I've up to the end of season 2, and I messaged Rich straight after seeing it and going, "What a great episode this was." And yeah, I think you texted back saying, "Proper Star Trek."
Yeah. I thought a lot of their second series felt like quite proper Star Trek, though, actually.
It did.
You know, less so in the third, unfortunately, but
No spoilers.
Oh, sorry, no. Well, that's it. That's all I'll tell you.
No, we've sold him season 3's crap.
No, I would say that.
I can't wait to watch it.
It struggles in a way that 2 didn't feel like it was struggling. It felt like actually pretty much almost every single one of those episodes felt very Trek in different ways.
Well, just the name and the ethos, and the fact that resonates through into Lower Decks, and the stars through hardship, and that sort of idea behind it, and how it does feel very much in keeping with Roddenberry's IDIC, and felt like another way of nicely exploring some of the issues they've done with Data, and even with Bashir and Deep Space Nine, sort of, where what is the reality of genetic modification, and should someone be penalised because of it? And how that relates historically to the eugenics wars, but when is that those old-fashioned notions defunct for a truly open society? For me, it is the best episode of Strange New Worlds. Chris?
My number 4, I also didn't put these in any order, so now I'm just improvising, is Ensign Rowe.
Yeah. We love Michelle Fulton. That's on my
I had not
shortlist.
considered that at all.
No, but to be honest, I think, Deep Space Nine is my favourite Star Trek. And I think the deep and very, very complicated exploration of a culture coming out of a 70-year occupation is Star Trek at its absolute best. And I was trying to work out well, when in Deep Space Nine do they explore this the best? And then I realized actually the Next Generation had set it up extraordinarily well in Ensign Row, and I went back to rewatch it, and there are so many great discussions in that episode. Picard sort of pushing back against the Admiral at how these people have been displaced, and the Bajorans pushing back on Picard and saying, we don't quarrel with you because you're innocent bystanders. And he says, well, why won't you help us? He says, because you're innocent bystanders and it's awfully convenient for you. And you sort of get that sense that obviously Deep Space Nine is able to take that and run with that and do all sorts of other fantastic things with it. But actually, right in that early episode, you have the guy running the refugee camp, you have Ro, you have the terrorist who is, and again, it's Star Trek, very complex. I think it's really complex to sort of humanize terrorists and their motivations, and I've always thought it's Star Trek doing its best. It's not really the Roddenberry thing per se. It almost feels like a topic that he might have shied away from a little bit, because I think it is really politically difficult by the time you get to a character like Major Kira, who is an unapologetic former terrorist for 7 seasons of television. This is very complicated, but we should be exploring that, and we should be talking about
freedom fighter, Chris. Freedom fighter.
Sorry. Okay, yes, freedom fighter. I suppose that's the one man's terrorist is,
and one of the better payoffs on Picard.
Yes, I absolutely. I tell you what, it blew me away when she turned up, and that whole arc came back, and I thought, wow, actually, you have completely delivered here in a way that we spent years questioning whether Picard could deliver anything, and then we were treated to Forbes back as Rolaren.
I think Roddenberry. The point about Roddenberry is he came from an America where terrorism wasn't a notion they really had to deal with. So I agree in his context, perhaps, but Roddenberry coming through that era, through this era, I don't think. I think it's something that you couldn't have shied away from. If you look at my number 2 in particular, he does address warfare.
Yeah.
He does. In more traditional
multiple
modes.
times.
Yeah, exactly. And it's worth noting that the sort of the narrative, the discourse around how the Viet Cong worked in Vietnam wasn't as terrorists.
No, it was guerrilla.
For whatever reason. It wasn't framed in the same way. And I think probably because it was on indigenous soil. So I just think perception, by the time you get to the 90s and to this sort of era, and even pre-America experiencing it firsthand on their own soil, it just was outside his vernacular rather than something I think he would have shied away from.
Yeah, but it still feels like it's a bit grey and a bit dark, and Roddenberry obviously wanted that, as we know from the early seasons of The Next Generation. He wanted that utopia, and you're right, he didn't shy away from topics like war and conflict, certainly in the original series and in episodes of The Next Gen while he was still alive.
You could say Khan is a terrorist.
Yes, you could, absolutely, and a former warlord. And there's a World War III and a eugenics war, so there's a lot of it. But something about the Bajoran resistance, I think, is a morally grey area that Star Trek, as a whole, I mean, really, they are the heroes of the piece, actually. So Star Trek does have a comment on it, and Star Trek is, these people were under a brutal military occupation and had every right to violently fight that military occupation.
But then the thing that redeems that stance, to some degree, to keeps it grey, but also more interesting, is they then flip that onto the Cardassians themselves.
They did. And
for the Dominion War,
totally.
Which is a stroke of genius.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, and by the time Kira's in a Starfleet uniform at the end, helping Cardassians be resistance fighters, I thought this is absolutely brilliant. This is really wonderful. But I guess I just wanted to go back to where did that start, and I could quite easily have gone for, I don't know, something like Duet in Deep Space Nine's first season, where you're sort of exploring this, how does one come to terms with, the monster when you come face to face with him, and sort of sympathizing with your former oppressors. There's lots that you could talk about in Deep Space Nine, but
there's the high ground, isn't there, in Next Gen? The Troubles allegory?
Yes, there is, and that is the one that never got broadcast on British TV because it mentioned a unified Ireland.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're right. The high ground does do that.
And also, just FYI, let's not forget, of all things, Enterprise tapped into 9/11.
Yes, of course. Absolutely. In fact, actually, when the task for this episode was to go for episodes, I did have a moment of needing to give credit to both Enterprise's third season, which absolutely tapped into a 9/11 sort of
fear, paranoia,
means justify the ends type stuff. Obviously, Battlestar Galactica did far better shortly after, but nevertheless, season 3 of Enterprise did that really well. And season 4 of Discovery, and this notion of an oncoming catastrophe that we really need to unite behind and get together as an allegory for, I thought, climate change. But actually, in episodes where they're trying to communicate with these aliens and they don't understand them, I actually thought, clumsy as lots of Discovery is clumsy, but nevertheless, some credit must be given to trying to tell that story across an entire season. I thought they did. Some of that struck me as pretty good Trek, actually.
Agreed.
And certainly on the theme of issues, but I couldn't pull a single episode from either Enterprise or Discovery season 4 that made me think, oh, you've encapsulated it here.
Well, with Discovery, that's the ongoing problem of it being ongoing. You makes it hard to pull out. It's not. I don't think for me it's no coincidence that in terms of New Trek, the first Ad Astra, springs to mind immediately because it's a contained story. It's related, but it's a contained story, and I think that's where Discovery, like so many things, is too much butter spread too thinly.
And I think as well, it's worth pointing out that Ensign Ro works as a standalone piece. Right. Obviously, they introduce her as a compelling new, slightly antagonistic member of the crew. That is really good character work. But that
is anti-Roddenberry.
Yes, that is. Yeah, because there's someone here who's just been released from prison.
Yeah, and is a disruptor of the peace and love on the ship. No question.
Everyone's shit constantly.
Yeah. But going back to Ensign Ro, you go, if they had never picked up the Bajorans again, which obviously they did, but I don't think when they wrote Ensign Ro that Deep Space Nine was, I don't think that the two were related. I think Ensign Ro existed first and then Deep Space Nine came afterwards. So you go, actually, if they never visited this again, I'm very glad they did, but if they had never done it again, this episode stands as a very complicated, morally grey scenario and an introduction to the unapologetically resisting Bajorans.
Great. I can't believe we're still on number 4. My number 4
well, Ian
is Measure of a Man.
Well, Ian, do you mind if I leap in and go ahead of you? Because my next pick is sort of related to what Chris was saying.
Go ahead.
Is that all right with you? So my pick, the reason why it's related is because it has Michelle Forbes' first appearance in The Next Generation.
Oh, I see. Sly.
Which is Half a Life.
Yeah.
Where she plays Dr. Timmerson's daughter. And I picked this one because it covers some topics and themes that aren't really covered elsewhere in Star Trek, maybe a little bit in certain episodes, but it's about, it sort of asks the question, what can the elderly contribute to society? And should it just be left to the young? And I can't really...
Like podcasting.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It does talk about...
Like journalists going into podcasting.
Oh yes, absolutely. It does talk about ritual suicide and euthanasia, and assisted suicide, which is covered in elsewhere. I'm thinking of episodes like Ethics and Death Wish, which we've spoken about before. But this one, I think it's more, and I like it's more that it's focused on what can the elderly contribute, and also that the focus is essentially the two guest stars. It's the rest of the crew is kind of there and around abouts, but they're not the focus of the story. And I think they had to cast someone like David Ogden Stiers in that role as Dr. Tiverson because they needed someone who could bring a nuance and empathy to that character.
One of Ian's favourite guest stars.
Yeah, and
Unquestionably.
the decision that he makes at the end, it's not the one that we want as the audience. We want him to be the paragon who stands up against this cultural tradition of this alien race, but he realizes that he's not the one who can do that. He's no
Logan.
he's just a scientist. Has interesting. Waxana has something to do in this episode. She's not just.
No, she's always got something to do. But whether you like it, it's a different issue.
She's not
Wait a second. That was her finest moment as a character and as an actress. So
I like Roxana too. So it's all good.
Watch yourself.
But yeah, I picked this episode more because I think it just covers a theme that isn't really covered elsewhere. There's a little bit in Sarek, I guess.
That's more overtly palliative.
Yeah.
Whereas this is not that. Meaning it's sort of some of the issues, but it's very different. He's waning because of old age and the condition.
Rich, was your Logan reference X-Men or Logan's Run?
Logan's Run, baby.
Okay.
If I had a flashing gem in my palm, it would have been flashing away.
Yep.
But do you remember around that time in the 90s, there was a lot going on about euthanasia. Dr. Jack Kevorkian, he was nicknamed Dr. Death, and he was convicted of murder in 1999. I had to look this up, by the way. The episode was broadcast in 91. He assisted the suicide of around 130 patients, and it was estimated that 60% of those patients were not terminally ill.
You've now officially means we're gonna have to run a trigger content warning now, Toby.
Still their choice. That was the thing. He didn't do it unwillingly to people. These are people who wanted it done. It's still a hot topic in New York.
Yeah.
They're just passing a law now allowing assisted suicide as long as everybody's on board and understands that certain decisions are permanent.
Yes, it is. So, Ian, how does your number 4 measure up?
Me? Measure of a man.
Okay, go. Come on, that was good.
Measure of a man.
Which is also on my list as well.
Yeah. Still timely. What is a human and who is to judge and who are we to judge? Excellent performances all the way around.
Yeah.
I remember reading up on this that Roddenberry originally almost nixed the whole idea because he wasn't into the lawyer concept for the show. Didn't think there'd even be lawyers at that time. On the other hand, hello, court martial. So I've never understood that particular story thread, but
only in the Navy,
right? I thought it's an unbelievably solid episode. Just in terms of internal Star Trek history, it's the first poker game, and it is the introduction of, by mention, the character has already been mentioned, Daystra Institute, which would become a major thing in Star Trek going forward over the decades. But as an episode, if you want to point to when is Star Trek tapping into what's going on in the real world as allegory, there's almost no finer example of that than this particular episode.
I've always loved the bit where he takes off Data's arm.
Yes.
It's like, that's dark.
Yeah, I like the bit where he turns him off because it feels like a violation, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it proves the point.
Maybe because we've seen that played a lot in data lore already. There's something about the removal of the arm. It's oddly, it objectifies him more than turning him off, because in theory you could knock us all unconscious. Just got no way to do it. But this, removing his arm and then putting it back on, I remember thinking that was a masterstroke of prosecution by Riker.
Yeah, he was well armed.
Red card.
So I picked this episode as well. I did.
How far up?
I mean, I've not ordered mine.
Oh, okay.
But it was actually in my third spot. I did initially question whether it is a social commentary episode. I then think it does tackle two important criteria, and that's the conflict of interest between the individual and centralized authority.
Yeah, I mean, this is
the
interesting. My
importance
number
of
one.
personal judgment over blind ignorance or obedience, rather. The drive for a utopian ideal, and where discrimination of all kinds is anathema.
Moot.
You know. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So is that you doing your number 3?
Yes.
Well, okay, we're making up ground.
I would say, you know this, Rich, but my favorite film is Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, whatever. And Mr. E.T. boy.
Phenom baby every time.
But it's that film. I think explores the themes in this episode a lot better for me. But there's a reason why I like this episode, and it ties into my love for that kind of questioning of what is sentience, what is life.
Can't believe I'm going to say this, but I totally agree with Rich. Blade Runner, so freaking boring.
One for the record books.
I couldn't stand it. I remember seeing it in a theater.
You don't like the motion picture either, so what do you know?
Hey, don't split me between both of you. I don't want to choose between Mummy and Daddy.
I have to say, for the record, I love Blade Runner. So
good man. I always knew I liked you,
Your transmission's
Chris.
Cutting out, Chris. I'm so sorry. It was great having you. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so my number 3 is, well, it's 2 episodes, but it's not a tie. It's Demons in Terror Prime from Enterprise.
That high up?
Yeah, I really like this. And the reason I revisited it fairly recently was because, of course, I watched, for our finales, I rewatched that terrible final episode of Enterprise. And this is the finale. These two are this is it. This is how it should end it. In the same way that when we talked about the tearjerkers, I found the stuff with T'Pol and Trip deeply moving. But even moving beyond that, beneath that, we talked about the 9/11 of it. Although this was a little bit further down the line, it is very much about still that idea of real-world anti-immigrant sentiment, what you're prepared to do, the xenophobia involved, what people misinformation now in terms of relevance, what's true, what's not, what's manipulated, what's not, that sort of the dressing up fundamentalist attitudes and extreme prejudice as in patriotic language. And that is that if you're a true patriot, you can't, you must agree with us. And just that whole sense of nationalism, which for a while, like it was on the wane, but 9/11 restarted in the US and in the UK, and it's still very much a wave we're riding. And so this double-parter for me is like the height of Enterprise, and because I'm moved by the personal implications and the effect, I think it's a very interesting socio-political statement about the nature of freedom, perception, nationalism, what hill you're prepared to die on, who you're prepared to die for, and what that actually represents, and who you're prepared to kill for, and what that actually means, and how far you're prepared to go to prove it. Interestingly, I think it's a much more extreme version of it. It's the same thing as that what Donald Trump is suing the BBC over at the moment in terms of them editing what he said out of order, but it didn't actually change what he said and the meaning of what he said. So they took it one step too far, which is, by doing that, gives him the avenue to go, well, it's just all wrong, it's all rubbish. Everything they've said is rubbish because of that. And that's an extension of far more benign, but still nonetheless manipulation of an event by allowing two things to collide, you undermine your own argument. And so this is why I keep saying this one is why I keep saying I should go back and rewatch Enterprise in general, was because these 2 episodes are really, really fantastic. And of course, you've got Peter Weller just rocking it. Our second RoboCop reference of this record.
Yeah.
It's also taking cloning and the moral and ethics of that, which obviously has been a long-running argument. And this is why it sadly stopped. Echoing what you said, Chris, it's just like, oh, you're really getting somewhere.
yeah, that was my feeling of that the whole fourth season of Enterprise, finale notwithstanding. But my feeling was, this is great, actually. They've really found their footing with the sort of micro arcs, of which this is a fabulous example.
So, Chris, what's your next?
I'm going to go for Voyager's Living Witness, which I think does get talked about a bit in the context of social commentary. It obviously feels like a very strange bottle episode where I don't think we deal with any of our actual characters, do we? It's like one of those, it's a future backup recording of the Doctor. The whole crew is gone. We only see them all as fake recreations. And interestingly, it's the same guest star. I can't remember his name now, but he's also in the one where they're dinosaurs. So he's the dinosaur scientist trying to say we evolved on Earth, and he's the museum curator in Living Witness. And for me, they're two top Voyager episodes for, I guess, yeah, social commentary, and his characters in both of those episodes undergo quite difficult journeys, I think. But the museum curator having to question everything that he's been taught and everything that he now is putting forward is really, really tricky. You know, that actually that the Kyrians were the aggressors and it turns out they weren't, and that it was his people. And I think there is so much in our own history where you could go, how interesting is it? You know, how we curate history. I remember going to Ho Chi Minh, doing a stopover on the way to Australia to see my wife's family, and there is the National Museum of American War Atrocities, and you just sort of go, oh, right, so you're putting it like that, are you? You don't want to sugarcoat that. You don't want to give a different name. No. That's what happened here, and here's our museum dedicated to it. And so many questions about narrative and history and who gets to tell the story. Even in that case, what if you've got the story wrong? You know, by the time we meet the museum curator, I believe it's already been 400 years. Right, so that again, our minds struggle a little bit, but it's already been 400 years before they activate the backup Doctor, and then the story in a brief epilogue takes us another 300 years into the future. But yeah, it's a big concept episode that I think I find thought-provoking every time I go back to it.
Real fast, guys. Henry Warrenitz is the actor who we were talking about, and he also played Jadan in The Drumhead, and was for Gagan in Distant Origin, and then Quarren in Living Witness.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a story track.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actor.
And it's very funny that you mentioned that, because you might have just mentioned another one of my episodes, which is hilarious. I'd not made the connection. I'd made the Voyager connection because I watched those two episodes on. I rewatched those two quite a lot, and I was like, "Hey, it's Henry again," and how great he is as both of those characters. But I'd forgotten about Jadan.
Yeah. So, Ian, we're up to your. What number are you on?
3.
So you're number 3.
Tuvix.
Oh. Kill it now!
Can worms open. Yes. Playing God. Limits of command. Body rights. And here's the thing that I like most about the episode. It made Janeway rather unlikable.
Yeah.
Number 1. And number 2, to the same point, it poses more questions than it answers. Now, there are things that my wife and I watch all the time. We're sitting here, catching up on things. And there's a ton of movies that you watch where you're like, no, give me an ending, right? What's the one that was just out with Idris Elba?
Oh, yeah, I adored that, House of Dynamite.
House of Dynamite. Loved the movie until the ending. What the fuck happened, okay? But it's smart filmmaking because it makes the audience think. So I toggle back and forth between those 2 points. I want my stories to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I don't mind some ambiguity that leaves things up to my imagination, but I don't like to be left so hanging that I'm like, what did I just spend my last 2 hours watching? Tuvix threads that needle very nicely. Tuvix gives you a very, very questionable decision that character lives with, right? Janeway I'm referring to here, and really doesn't doubt herself on it all that much when you think about it. Yes, of course she questions it, but she believes in her decision. And she's literally playing God there. And so it's up to us, the audience, to decide whether she's right or wrong or morally acceptable in her actions or not. To this day, people debate this episode.
Yeah.
Was she right? Was she wrong? Was she overstepping her bounds?
Why does he look so weird?
Yeah, I mean, that is, to me, really good television. And it partly goes against my point, which is what I like about it. Because I hate the fact that we don't get
A definitive
full
answer.
satisfaction at the end of the episode. So that's one for me that I always find interesting as a subject to debate with my Star Trek friends, because it literally, everybody has a different opinion on it.
Enterprise's similitude does the similar.
I was going to say
Yes,
that too. Yeah.
I totally agree with you, Toby. Yep.
But also, I'm always convinced that part of the people who are pro keeping Tuvix are because they don't like Ethan Phillips, and it would remove Neelix. It would have removed Neelix. No, because I love we've established I quite like the characters. Other people don't.
And
tend to
Neelix
like.
loves you, Rich, by the way.
I'm sure he does. As long as he doesn't sing. Joking aside, about the reason I mentioned about how the character looks is I think the makeup team did a very good job at making him look unnerving.
Mm-hmm. Kind of Brundlefly.
Yeah, exactly. So that you couldn't quite shake that creep. So that it wasn't simple. So even if you did warm to the character and agreed with that moral argument, something's still off.
Physical. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And who does that put the onus on? The viewer.
Exactly, yeah. It makes you culpable. And so it's very smart, that. Very clever.
It was a little while ago now, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, didn't she wade into the two? Didn't someone suggest she do a Twitch stream that was all about the Tuvix debate?
Yeah, it's a few years ago now. Yes.
And then I think Kate Mulgrew got involved at some point as well. So actually, for picking an episode that has that absolutely plays into real world ethical debates, I think that's a fantastic choice, because here we have a senior American politician going, all right, yeah, let's talk about Tuvix.
And crucially, it's one of the topics which we're all still slightly tentative about talking about because of the things it taps into now. It's a fascinating bit of prescience, but again, not so on the nose. So if you talk about some of the other things we've talked about, similar issues, but not in the same way, and it's a very creative sci-fi way of doing it. We could do a little tally chart of transporter accidents, admittedly, at this point, but
there are so many episodes where at points our captains have to do some things that are quite unlikable. This isn't Janeway's only one. Actually,
she's got more than most.
I do think she has more than most. But there is, Sisko is effectively a war criminal in his own way. At various points, he does things that are, I would say, morally ambiguous, being kind.
Archer certainly does.
Well, Archer wasn't breaking Prime Directive or any of that stuff because it didn't exist yet. So a lot of what came later was in response to his actions. But to your point about Sisko, yeah, he broke the rules.
Yeah, of course he did.
And lied about it.
It.
Well, in Moonlight, blood seems quite black.
Yeah.
Double reference for everyone.
Wow. Just for the record, Blade Runner still sucks. Go on.
So, Toby, we got your number 3. Or did we already talk about it?
Measure of a Man was my number 3. Well, I've not ordered mine, but yeah, it was.
My number 2 is A Taste of Armageddon.
So that was my first pick.
Aha!
Your number 1 or the first one you picked?
It was the first one I picked.
Huh. Interesting. So, Taste of Armageddon is the primary social commentary is the abstraction and therefore sanitization of war and the distancing that happens, and it's obviously steeped in Cold War, nuclear fear, nuclear paranoia of the time, and how that, which is kind of funny because also if you sort of look at the military tradition that Roddenberry came from and was steeped in terms of his own serving, there's, I think it still retains slightly romanticized ideas of hand-to-hand combat and all that sort of thing has some value in weird, screwed up way. But equally, that if you dilute the depiction and understanding and realities of war, you risk it becoming commonplace and people being desensitized to it. The reason this is so high on my list now is that's only increased. So although the nuclear threat, the mutual self-destruction appears, well, until we get crazy, to be compartmentalized and put to a side, that's now resident in sort of drones.
Yeah.
In cyber attacks, autonomous weapon systems where it's essentially like video gaming, where that remove is there. So there's that diffusion responsibility that the digital world can put between you and someone you're attacking. So it's a similar impulse to someone who's willing to troll people online because they're protected by their anonymity and by the sense that they're not in the same space. And I think so even though it is overtly about the Vietnam War and about let's remember this is still really close to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the threat of nuclear annihilation was still very much a recent piece of history.
Well, this aired in '67, and Nixon began withdrawing U.S. troops from Vietnam in 1969.
Yeah, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was 62. It's a very interesting and complicated. It's not, because I don't believe it's anti-war. And you break it down, I think it's a representation of war, or a type of war, which is an interesting American exceptionalism stance to take.
I think that's a very British view of the American military system. I would venture to disagree with you, but go on.
No, please do. No, absolutely. I would love to hear that point of view.
I think it's anti-war. It's anti-war.
But I think for me, it's the cost of war, and the loss of life on a horrific scale and the humanitarian impact. That's what the computer is essentially removing.
Mm-hmm.
It brought to mind there was a Save the Children campaign a little while ago where it was just because it's not happening here doesn't mean it's not happening. Yeah. And it's that kind of like blanking of what's happening because the fighting is so far away that it's easy to kind of like ignore actually the impact that it's having.
Or just because it happened doesn't mean it won't happen again. And that's the classic, do we learn our lessons?
Yeah.
But that's all under the umbrella of war. I know what you're saying, Rich. I just don't necessarily completely buy that concept. I still think it's a very specific commentary on war itself and the cause and effects.
No, it's fair enough. I mean, I'm not trying to make a statement of this being a definitive statement of what, or any sense of that analysis is correct. But it doesn't feel quite as cut and dry of that to me. And I sort of think of it in the context of Roddenberry's military history, all the military elements that are brought into Star Trek in terms of Starfleet, the role it plays. Maybe later it's less explorers and more peacekeepers, which is probably, that's not Roddenberry per se. So I acknowledge that. But also the reality that it's come from a Western society with the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms and all this sort of thing, which from an external point of view always feels an absurdist stance to take.
Could not agree with you more.
Yeah. So in that sense, that's what I mean. That's why I don't think it's cut and dry. I think overall, it probably is anti-war, but there's grey in there in terms of the statement the episode's actually making.
Okay.
It's also a great episode one of the things I quite like about Kirk is that he sort of runs around the galaxy not really respecting other cultures and people. It's like there's just an absolute, and this is one where you're totally with him as he's running around going, you're crazy, you're all crazy, and I'm going to fuck this place up. and we're just going to destroy your entire apparatus. And this really prime directive be damned, right? I don't care. And obviously his crew are caught in it, so I suppose he doesn't have much of a choice. But it is one for an angry Kirk who shows absolutely no respect to these aliens, their culture, their way of doing things. One of the ones where you are 100% with him. I'm not sure it's ever that clear cut again, actually, but it is one where you want.
No, and it is interesting that in terms of a future which makes a point of not being moral arbiters because of being sort of evolved, there is a lot of that. And as you say, absolutely, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't thought about Kirk. Right, because I agree with him. So, I mean, it's funny.
I just watch him like, I don't know, there are just so many episodes where, again, there are some questionable things that he does, a lot of them, but I never really see that, the Picard thing is this, absolutely, I'm a diplomat, I want to respect, I want to understand. Even Janeway has a fair heap of, I really want to understand, that I just don't ever think I got with Kirk. Almost at all.
Yeah, was it Picard? What does it Picard says? My first duty is to the truth.
Yes,
isn't he?
Yeah,
didn't he say that at some point? Kirk's isn't.
No, no. Kirk's sort of turned up, looked around, made up his mind. Is going to judge. Is absolutely judging your alien culture, and then we'll try and sleep with one of your women.
There is that.
I just wanted
That's
to
what I
add.
aspire to.
That's why you've got this reputation at the con.
They call me Dr. Spelling.
I just wanted to add a very small bit to this episode in terms of it's very subtle and it's not the point of it, but it also does say something about AI and how that's integrated into and used by society, and here it's used to take responsibility away and to be just the cold calculating. It takes away the human emotional factor.
Well, that's where we're moving to, arguably. I mean, that is what Skynet is, although presented in a belligerent, malevolent way. It is that putting, as AI is used in its most rationalized point of view as a tool to take away tasks which are mundane. That is a ladder that builds to that point, in theory.
But interestingly, the AI is not the villain here.
No, I know.
It's just doing its job. It's what it's been programmed to do.
Yeah, New Trek, it would be the baddie, for definite.
Yeah, it'd be control.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally and figuratively. All right, number 2. Now, Dr. Nunn here, you're going to have to prescribe something for me, because I have a habit of ties.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God.
And you can see by the reaction of my colleagues here that this is going to drive them nuts. But Deep Space Nine, as I think we all agree, is the best of the Star Treks. And it is almost too much of a good thing to choose important social issue episodes of Deep Space Nine. If you said to me, let's learn about racism, I would watch Far Beyond the Stars. If you said, let's get some commentary on the price of war and guilt, it would be Duet. If you said to me, again, Price of War, In the Pale Moonlight, it is an embarrassment of very dark, sad riches when it comes to Deep Space Nine. I would, if I was going to sit and watch one, only because I've seen Duet a million times, it is my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine, I would go with Far Beyond the Stars, just because I haven't watched it as often. And I think it's a brilliantly done episode, and as much as I like, what's a good word for it, peeling back the layers of the onion on it, that, oh, look who's playing this character. Oh, he's out of makeup. Look who's, all of that type of stuff. All of the drawings in there of the characters and the newspaper element of it, and Renee Auberjonois' great performance, and how great the ladies look and the styles and all of it. It's a feast for the eyes. It's a feast for the mind. It makes you think. It makes you care. It makes you question. It makes you want to look up some real life history. It makes you want more. Far Beyond the Stars is Deep Space Nine and Star Trek at its ultimate, finest, best.
Agreed.
There's so much to discuss. We could be a whole podcast just on this one episode.
I think we would all agree. Anyway,
so I'm going to shut up right there, and you guys pick your number 2s.
Well, I had the same trouble going through Deep Space Nine because it is a treasure trove of all the things that you just said.
Which is why you didn't roll your eyes like my friends here when I mentioned that.
No, it's and even on the war thing, you just how many episodes could you pick, right?
Right.
I thought of the siege of is it AR-558? But then actually, what about Nog and PTSD? Because that's really powerful too, and I know that had a real world impact with veterans who watched it. But then, of course, you remember there's the one where it's Jake and the Doctor running around on being attacked by Klingons on that colony. Well, that's pretty full on. That's one. These are now you're now into Star Trek that actually I wouldn't sit down with my kids and watch. Right, suddenly you've crossed a little bit of a threshold where these are quite violent and they're quite dark. So you could talk about those for a very long time. I did settle on one that quite classically makes all of the lists and definitely came into the news cycle a bit last year because it's the fake anniversary of when this episode took place, which is Past Tense.
Yeah.
So that is one that I don't think I can watch that episode without shedding a tear, despite the amount of times that I've seen it. I know that Robert Hewitt Wolfe, I think, wrote it, didn't he? I know he was inspired by a story that they were considering in San Francisco, setting up these districts. So he'd read it in a paper and thought, what the fuck? And maybe I need to put this into a Star Trek episode. And I am always blown away by that episode and what they're able to do with it. I think it remains one of Star Trek's most prescient things that, unfortunately, I believe there is a line where Sisko says, well, it just sort of almost had to get worse before it could get better. And I kind of cling to that myself personally on an almost daily basis because I don't really see it getting much better. I see that we would be heading towards sanctuary districts and hospitals run like critical care before we'll be doing anything of the utopian nature. And that's a struggle, I think, to admit that and to have the series be the dark mirror, which we don't really think it is. I think we always think of Star Trek as the optimistic thing. Certainly that's how I've engaged with it throughout my life.
Well, I think it's a case of it's the Rolling Stones. Deep Space Nine might not be the Star Trek you want, but it is the Star Trek you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And consistently, and I think that's why it didn't do as well when it first broadcast and was always considered the black sheep of the Star Trek family, but has enjoyed an amazing resurgence in new fans. So anyway, yeah, Past Tense for me, coming in maybe a bit of an odd place in Deep Space Nine's run. Almost no reason for it to be there. And we know it became quite a serialized show, but I come back to it again and again as one that I think is a very tragic tale that was set in 2024 and unfortunately still find very prescient and very relevant.
Well, I'm glad you picked this episode, Chris, because I selected this as my number one time travel episode for
great.
The last episode. But I was explaining to these guys then that I watched it for this episode, and then I'd forgotten how good it was, and then I've got to put this in my time travel episode.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it makes sense because it is an amazing time travel story as well. You know,
and part 2 directed by Frakes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. He gets in there, doesn't he?
Yeah.
On the back lot at Paramount, on the New York set at Paramount.
Yeah.
All right, are we up to number 1?
We are, but so it's Toby. Have we done yours then?
So, well, I had Taste of Armageddon in my number 1s, but I haven't done
your number 2.
Yeah, although I said these aren't really ordered for me.
Okay, so what's your remaining one then?
Well, one of the things that I've been trying to do is to pick episodes that we haven't really discussed before. So this pick is Star Trek Deep Space Nine's Far Beyond the Stars.
Hey, okay.
Good choice.
I just couldn't leave this one out. I think there's a better exploration of institutional racism, historical repression, discrimination in all of Star Trek.
Yeah.
I also, there's something that we didn't talk about when Ian spoke about this a little bit earlier is alongside all of that, there is more subtly a discussion or a debate going on about creativity and artistic works and how important those are for expression and how
the first thing censored.
Yeah, and how that impacts. Yeah, absolutely, definitely. You know, the repression. It's repressing sedition essentially because art can be used to question authority in a more palatable way, maybe. And from my work over the years at BAFTA, and particularly with children and young people, and how the screen arts in that instance is used as a way of developing like soft skills and expression in young people. It's so important, and you know, it's the reason
well-being.
why yeah, exactly. Mental well-being is it's the reason why we fell in love with shows like Star Trek. I think
absolutely. Okay, so that what you just said about that is actually relevant to my number one pick, and I don't think this would have been my number one pick until a few years ago, but I'll read you the famous quote from it. With the first link, the chain is forged, the first speech censored, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, change us irrevocably. So it's the drumhead is my number one.
Also mine.
It's my favourite Star Trek court episode, and I do love a good courtroom drama. It's got an absolute top-notch guest star in Gene Simmons, who I believe is actually a Trekkie. Is that right? I don't know if I've picked that up, but was very pleased to be on board. But it is also one of my favourite Patrick Stewart Picard episodes. His quiet resistance and eloquent resistance, and the arguments he makes for this, the doubling down on the witch hunt, because it becomes more about pride and reputation than it does truth, and it's all garbed under this notion of justice, and how once the actual original reason for the investigation is debunked, the investigation continues anyway. So on a sort of earlier, mid-20th century American history, it's obviously McCarthyism kind of metaphor, but increasingly this is the one to me which right now feels incredibly relevant to all Western democracies, certainly, and how be careful how much you allow anger, fear, discrimination, pride, notions of national identity and purpose overriding critical thought, fairness, empathy, and that
guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Which is at the heart of every judicial system, and very much in the US system, which is now crucially potentially more important than ever. And obviously we don't like to dwell too much on real world political situations, because we're a positive podcast and we want everyone to potentially listen to us and things. But this, to me, Star Trek doesn't exist in a world where these rules aren't, these theories, these ethos, this philosophy isn't applicable, because it wouldn't be able to make the stuff it makes and the stuff we fell in love with. That humanist point, that striving for more, for being better, being greater, being socially responsible for each other, and an aspirational idea. And so the drumhead for me now, as well as being a great piece of drama, a great episode with great performances, and one of Patrick Stewart's finest moments as Picard, is just horribly prescient still, and very powerful. And I wondered, I thought I might be wrong, and then I rewatched it for this and was like, no, this is this is pretty strong.
And I got to interview Gene Simmons for Howl's Moving Castle. She was one of the voices in the Miyazaki movie, and I was thrilled to interview her because of Star Trek. I didn't even know all about her career at that
Spartacus.
point. Yeah, Spartacus.
So, Chris, it was yours as well, so we can go straight into you.
Yeah, I think you've covered all the reasons why it works, and there's another line that jumped out on my rewatch quite recently, which is, the road from legitimate suspicion to rampant paranoia is very much shorter than we think. Something is wrong here, Mr. Worf. I don't like what we've become. That line, I think, resonated more with me this time than maybe previously. It is, as the McCarthy trials were, a perversion of the legal system for ends that are not about the truth. Certainly by midway through this episode, we're pretty sure the investigation's wrapped up. There's no question anymore about who did what. I mean, it's the Klingon spy who already said, yeah, I did it. Yeah. So, what you're watching is someone in a position of power and authority thoroughly abuse that power and authority with acolytes who are willing to assist in that endeavor. Not just her Beta Z aide, who I thought actually was really well played as he questions people in the sort of courtroom, and the other woman who's with her, but Worf, right? There he is, happy to help along. I've got an investigation. It's fantastic. It is the journey he goes on. It's maybe one of the moments where the Next Generation sort of does Worf right. I don't think they get him as right as Deep Space Nine does later. And this is a great moment for him in a great episode, particularly by the time you get to.
But her arguments are convincing until they're not.
Yeah. That's why her casting is crucial as well. Yeah. And then the writing is good because it often, but because she is a classically trained actor with a lot of history, she brings a natural authority, which wouldn't work if that wasn't there. The episode wouldn't work if you weren't close to going,
Yes, she is very convincing, and that's why it works. And again, I think when Star Trek,
why she's dangerous.
Yeah, and when Star Trek hits, it hits, and this is one of those examples. The casting is absolutely key, and I think one of the things that all of the series have done well at various points is actually cast really strong female roles really well, even for guests. And the episodes pivot on whether you believe that performance or not.
My number one. So, again, I had to go back and forth on this one. Oddly enough, I didn't put it at number one, but it would wind up being 7 or 8. And that would be Devil in the Dark. But, like I said, 7 or 8. Number one is going to be a controversial choice. Some people think it's a very stupid episode. But this...
It's not Captain's Holiday, is it?
No. This ties into...
It's not Masks, is it?
No. This ties into... It's not the Richard Matthews story either. This ties into my personal love of Star Trek. All right, my. If you asked the question, what was your entry point into Star Trek, and I think we discussed this back in our first podcast, was Devil in the Dark. Was the one that I remember sticking out for me early on. But the other one that always hit home for me is Let That Be Your Last Battlefield.
Yeah, I consider that as well.
There is no
that's on
more
my short
of
list,
It's the hoariest of episodes. It could not be any more on the nose. It could not be any cheesier. It could not be any more ham-fisted and heavy-handed. But I was watching this episode as maybe 14 or 15-year-old kid on my black and white television in my bedroom at home on Long Island as a kid. And it's overdramatic, and like I said, it couldn't be more obvious, but it hit home. For me as a kid being affected personally by a story that's trying to instill values in me while be entertaining at the same time, this is the one. I was shocked when we were doing this and I was putting it down, and like we said, I was ranking these. This is a hugely important episode to me in a way that far beyond the stars, even though it touches on similar ground, and brilliantly so, right? Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. It brings it home literally in black and white. And I always just thought it was powerful. And there are great lines among the cheesiness. All that matters to them is their hate, is a wildly simple few words that says everything. You can no more destroy this ship than I can change color. Another important line. No, but that's all they have left regarding what's going to happen going forward, if they're just going to go back down on the planet and chase each other. I stand by it as a choice, and I'm kind of laughing at myself because I'm waiting for Rich to throw a very bad movie back at me, but like Blade Runner, and say that's got to be your Blade Runner, Ian, and it kind of is.
No, I don't think you. No, but we talked about this. We've talked about this episode before, and I don't think everything you just said can't be disputed. yes, it is heavy-handed, and that's how we talked about it. And it's not subtle.
Yeah, it's a blunt hammer.
Yeah, and if anything's on the nose, it squashes the nose, obliterates the nose, pushes the bridge of the nose into the brain. But it is everything you've just said.
Yeah.
Well, who else was doing this at the time?
Right.
Well, so this is something that, like, when we talked about this, or when this topic was suggested, my initial thoughts were it's hard to look beyond the original series and the Next Generation, because in so many instances they were doing it first.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say, in terms of like putting morality plays together and facing ethical dilemmas, I think maybe later shows have tackled them better and in a more considered and more compassionate way. You comparing this to Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, Too Far Beyond the Stars is night and day in terms of what it does and how it does. Yeah. But in terms of the groundbreaking drama, the original series and Next Generation, which iterated on that, is where it's at.
And there may be some 14-year-old kid for whom, Far Beyond the Stars is their episode. There may be that episode of Strange New Worlds for that 14-year-old. That's the beauty of Star Trek and the fact that we're going on 60 years. But for me, who is, 61 years old, my episode, my entry point, and the one that to this day almost hits home most, City on the Edge of Forever is still my favorite episode, still the one that makes me cry, still the whatever for all of that. But Let That Be Your Last Battlefield was absolutely mind time travel to go back and revisit.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I did. And
61, huh? You'd be dead in half a life. Your usefulness is over.
Yeah. Is that wish fulfillment coming on? I don't know what are you talking about.
Keep slagging off Blade Runner and it will be, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. But we shouldn't. I'll just take a moment just to separate our. If we take our aesthetic, critical sort of film and television brains off entirely, a blunt message can sometimes be valuable.
Absolutely.
And so there is something as simplistic as it is of that image, half white, half black, on different sides, and what that means, that is effective. And somebody could need that at a certain point. Sometimes a sophisticated, subtle, empathetic, and adjacent message doesn't get through.
And sometimes raw is better than subtle. There's no question.
So it might not be the most eloquent, sophisticated piece of social commentary in Star Trek, but it's undeniably, and especially in context, a powerful, effective one.
Agreed.
So Toby, we already did yours.
I'm all out.
Well, so there you go. And just to say that Chris has a couple of projects out in the world at the moment. So Chris, if you just want to give them a quick plug.
So there's a feature documentary about the cult film The Wicker Man called Children of the Wicker Man that is set for US release in or about May on Blu-ray and in cinemas. That's quite exciting. And there is a book also called Children of the Wicker Man, published by History Press, that I am the editor of. I've also just produced a fiction folk horror film inspired by a lost film that Robin Hardy was trying to make before he died. That's called Wrath of the Gods and will appear at a festival sometime later this year.
Fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. So those were our picks for our 5 top social commentary episodes. What are yours? Let us know. All the details to get in contact with us, our email, our social media are included in the description. And please rate, review, and share this episode if it sets your blood boiling or you disagree and you're a Blade Runner lover. Yeah, nobody's perfect.
I'm gonna put Blade Runner in every episode from now on. I'm gonna sneak it in.
Peace, love, and logic, everybody. And Blade Runner is totally overrated.
Terrara bit, and Blade Runner is the best film ever made.
Thank you very much for having me. I also love Blade Runner.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with Rich Matthews, Ian Spelling, and Toby Weidman. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us on beyondffpod@gmail.com or check us out on social media. You can even join our Patreon at BFF Beyond the Final Frontier. Huge thanks go out to Alex Weidman for the brilliant original music. Please search Alex Weidman Composer on YouTube to hear the full fantastic theme and more. Also thanks goes to award-winning voiceover artist Cissy Jones for our excellent opening monologue. Find out more about her incredible work at cissyjones.com. And of course, last but not least, our brilliant artwork comes from the designer Russell Seal. Discover more of his work on behance.net/Russell Seal. Thanks again and see you next episode, Beyond the Final Frontier.